I recently got my CDL license, and since then, I've been traveling all across the country seeing different states, cities, and small towns. For the most part, all of my loads and unloads have been smooth. I've driven through rough neighborhoods and even ghost towns, but nothing ever sent a chill down my spine like Hollow Creek, Vermont. The night I went was a random Friday. I had just finished delivering a load to a warehouse in Burlington when my boss called and asked me to pick up another load from Hollow Creek, about an hour away. I checked the time. It was getting close to midnight. Normally I would have complained, but I was off the next day, so I just shrugged it off, hopped in my truck, and started driving. On the way there, something already felt off. I'd never been asked to pick up a load that late before. As I got closer, a thick fog started rolling in. It was so dense that even my headlights felt useless, barely cutting through the gray. Still, I kept driving. Eventually, I passed a large sign on the side of the highway, "Welcome to Hollow Creek," and that's when things really started to feel wrong. I called my boss and asked exactly where I needed to go. He told me to head to a district called Rowan Ridge. As I drove deeper into Rowan Ridge, the city disappeared. There was nothing but miles of cornfields stretching out on both sides of the road. No houses, no lights, just darkness and crops swaying in the wind. Then I saw a warehouse sitting alone in the middle of all that land. No parking lot, no loading dock, nothing. I pulled up anyway. I stepped out of my truck, expecting someone to be waiting, but there was no one. The place was dead silent, so I walked over to a side door and knocked. No answer. That's when the uneasiness really set in. I was standing in the middle of nowhere, in a place I didn't know, surrounded by nothing but cornfields, and it was past midnight. I decided to call my boss and let him know no one was there, but when I walked back to my truck, the door was locked. My stomach dropped. My keys were inside. My phone was inside. I was stuck. I let out a frustrated sigh, then heard something rustle behind me. I immediately spun around, but there was nothing. All right, I muttered to myself. I'll just walk down the road. Find a house or a barn. Someone's got to have a phone. So I started walking. 10 minutes passed, or at least it felt like 10 minutes. It could have been longer. The whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. Every few steps, I turned around. Nothing. Then, in the distance, I saw a house with the porch light on. Relief hit me instantly. I started walking faster toward it, but as I did, that same fog rolled back in, thicker than before. Within seconds, I couldn't see anything. I kept moving in what I thought was the right direction, but suddenly, I wasn't on the road anymore. I was in the cornfield. Panic set in immediately. I tried to turn around, tried to find my way back, but no matter which direction I went, it felt like I was only getting deeper. That's when I saw it. A scarecrow. But something about it wasn't right. The sack on its head didn't look like cloth, it looked like leather. Its body, stuffed with hay, looked wrong. Like something was underneath it, something real or alive. I stood there, confused and scared. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I turned to see another scarecrow, then another, and another. My chest tightened as they were forming a circle around me. Slowly, they started walking closer. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. None of it made sense. And then the fear that had me frozen in place snapped. So, I ran. I ran faster than I ever have in my life, pushing through the corn, not caring where I was going, just trying to get away. Behind me, I heard them. Running, keeping up with me. Their footsteps, if you could even call them that, were crashing through the field. I didn't dare look back at first, but when I did, I wish I hadn't. Their mouths were hanging open, their bodies moved wrong, and they were gaining on me. Tears streamed down my face. This isn't real, I kept telling myself. This can't be real, I screamed for help. Then something grabbed my shoulder. I was yanked to the ground before I could even react. They were all around me, closing in, reaching for me. I shut my eyes. I knew it was over. Then, bang. The sound was deafening. I covered my ears as another shot rang out. I opened my eyes. An older man stood there with a shotgun. He reached down, grabbed my arm, and pulled me to my feet with surprising strength. I looked around and realized something that didn't make sense. because we were right in front of the house, the same one I had seen earlier. I didn't question it. I just ran inside. He followed close behind, slammed the door shut, and locked it. Then he leaned his shotgun against it. He turned to me. "You, the trucker supposed to pick up the load?" he asked. I nodded, still shaking. He sighed and sat down. "I was supposed to help you load up," he said. "Told your boss to delay you until morning." Clearly he didn't listen. I didn't know what to say. I was still trying to understand what I had just gone through. The old man stood up and walked over to me. He looked me dead in the eyes. "The evil in those fields," he said quietly, "it preys on the living." He paused. "I've seen a lot of good men fall to it." Then his voice softened just a bit. "You're one of the lucky ones." I stayed in that house until sunrise. When morning came, he drove me back to my truck. We managed to get the door open, loaded up the cargo, and I left without looking back. And I can promise you this, I will never return to Hollow Creek. I open my eyes, stretch, and yawn. God, I feel good. Pain-free for the first time in a long time. I move my limbs. They are not stiff or sore, which is surprising, but good. In fact, my foremost sensation is one of hunger, a deep, insatiable hunger. I feel as if I haven't eaten anything for an eternity. I last remember a Roman soldier holding a cloth dipped in wine on the tip of his spear to my parched mouth. Not to help me, the cunt, but to keep the agony alive longer. Ah, well, it is all in the past now. I rise. The stone floor feels cool beneath the soles of my feet. I look with interest at the jagged holes in my feet. I can see the gray stone through the holes. Bits of my bones poke through the red flesh, together with some dangling veins and nerves. I wonder what happened to the nails. I look at the holes in my hands, slowly turning them over, and touch my sharp, protruding broken bones. The overwhelming hunger clouds every other sensation and dulls the memories that had been flashing through my brain in a huge jumble. I walk to the entrance of the cavern. Alive. I was not a particularly strong or athletic man. Dead. I raise my holy hand and push the giant rock away from the cavern entrance as easily as brushing a dead leaf off. The two soldiers standing on guard scream like little children, as if they were the ones unarmed and dressed merely in a tattered shroud. Their arms do them no good, of course. I snatch their dull spears out of their hands. One drives his sword through me, the whites of his eyes flashing like a startled horse. I easily draw it out of my torso and toss it aside. Then I grasp him tight as he turns to flee and bring my mouth down, fastening my sharp teeth in his muscular shoulder, tearing off chunks of flesh. Nothing has ever tasted so delicious since the dawn of time. I have pinned the other one down beneath my foot, and I take my time with my two-man feast. Soon enough, it is all done, and there is nothing but a pile of bloody bones and Roman armor, and yet my hunger is barely satiated. It stings me almost as sharply as the moment I set foot out of the cavern. I chew thoughtfully on the last delicious bits of sinew, thinking about where to find more flesh. I consider the bustling port of Aole Ray, but somehow I do not quite feel ready to face the crowds yet. And, of course, my idiots. I'll have to deal with them, but for now, I just want to take pleasure in moving and eating freely. I've always had a soft spot for the taste of fish and salt. I set off towards the Azure Coast. Contestant number 0. Would you like me to repeat the question? There were tallies carved into the flesh of my skin. I stopped counting when they surpassed 1,000. 1,000 cuts, 1,000 questions. 1,000 times I tried to die. How long has it been? I let myself think. How many days, weeks, months, years had gone by? I was 19 when I appeared on the Golden One. I had no prior memory of applying for it. I hadn't even heard of the show. I just opened my eyes one day and was immediately blinded by neon light from the podium opposite me. 12 strangers playing for cash that didn't exist with stakes that were very real. The game never ended. We reached $1 million and then $1 billion, but the rounds kept going, questions thrown at us with no time to breathe. I didn't get an explanation. Why? I couldn't just walk off set because the cameras would follow me, and so would the snipers set up behind the fake audience of cardboard faces. Even if I was brave enough to, I couldn't. My ankles were bound in chains, tying me down to my podium. I counted my days through tallies on my skin. I started on my arms, and when I'd covered them, I moved to my legs. When my pen was snatched away from me, I used the pointy edge of a nail to carve each mark into my flesh. What was left of my clothes was filthy, shredded, and stuck to my skin, a plastic name tag glued to my chest. I was contestant number 0. I didn't even have a real name. If I referred to myself by my real name, I would be punished. Contestant number 0. Do you have an answer for me? The host's voice was growing impatient, almost infuriatingly excited. If I failed to even try answering a question, I would immediately be punished. She loved it. Her voice and tone dripped euphoria. Like every wrong question, every punishment, was her own personal brand of heroin. I never saw the host's face, except on the screen, a cartoonish grinning woman. We were not allowed to look behind us, only straight forward, facing each other. However, I could hear the click-clack of her heels dancing behind me as she paced back and forth, awaiting my answer. Could you repeat the question? I found my voice, barely a breath through my lips. I couldn't even recognize myself anymore. My voice was somehow deeper, hollowed out. I couldn't recall a time when I'd laughed or cried or expressed any emotion. I had always been numb, always cold and hollow and wrong, always with a dull pain in the back of my head that never went away, and the endless ache threatening to buckle my legs. Contestant number 2 tried to sit down during round 38. She said she couldn't take it anymore, her body collapsing. She was shot point blank in the head. I don't mean she was shot quietly and painlessly. Contestant number 2 was given a frontal lobotomy, so it hurt. So she suffered. The bullet went straight through her eye. When she was screeching, begging for mercy, I landed on the death tree 6 rounds later, and she was shot again. This time for real. I could still see dried blood splatters staining the ground. If I looked closer, I glimpsed tiny shards of skull. Why, of course. The host's voice bounced around in my mind. But only if you say, please. I had to smile at the camera. If I didn't smile, I was dead. Contestant number 5 refused to smile, and her spine was pulled out. Please, I said through a big, cheesy grin. Once again, for $6 million. Contestant number 0, please answer the following question. The remaining podiums around me lit up in electric blue light. There were only 3 of us left. How long had it been since I ate, drank, took a bath? The host cleared her throat. Contestant number 0. Name the actor famous for playing the popular comic book character Deadpool. Fuck. Deadpool was Marvel, right? Gosling came to mind. The Notebook. The crazy movie with the heads in the freezer. What was that called again? You have 15 seconds, contestant number 0. Ryan Gosling. The name was in my mouth. It made so much sense. But when I was opening my mouth to speak, my gaze flicked to contestant number 8's podium. His decomposing body was still there, still shriveled up, the stink of rot and decay choking my thoughts into fruition. Across from me, Ella was trembling, lit up in neon light. Her eyes were unseeing, mouth curved into a silent cry. If I didn't open my mouth in the next 10 seconds, we were fucked. I wasn't just playing for my life. I was playing for theirs. I risked a glance at Diju, who was trying not to fall asleep, half-lidded eyes flickering. Contestant number 3, also known as Deju, was already dead. Deju died 40 rounds ago, yet through this fucked-up game show, he was also alive. Deju didn't look alive. His cheeks had a grayish tinge, hollow eyes devoid of color, splintered nothing where a soul should have been. He was dead for 40 rounds, enough time for him to find peace or whatever. And here he was, pulled back to his partially decomposed body. I could still see the reddish smears of blood staining his lips and chin, the giant splatter of scarlet on the wrangled remnants of his college sweater. Deju was mouthing something very subtly, his lips curling around the words. S-ray. I read his mouth. Ray? S-ray, S-ray. S-ray, E. S-ray, ray. He was getting a little less subtle. It was really hard not to stare at the gaping cavern in his chest, where his heart had been yanked out. That was Deju's punishment for not knowing who sang the song, Hit Me Baby One More Time. When he was awarded the Ace Tear Your Heart Out prize, I thought it was metaphorical. That was until a masked man stepped onto the stage, strode over to Deju, and ripped his heart from his chest, squeezing it to pulp between his gloves. I remember watching the boy's eyes roll back, his body flopping to the ground. I thought it was fast, but in reality, Deju's heart had been carved from his chest slowly enough for him to feel everything. In those fragmented seconds before his death, he felt the sudden intrusion, the agony jolting his body. I think the masked man squeezed it, already pulverizing it, before it left his chest cavity. Deju's mouth opened as if he was trying to speak, trying to cry out, but he couldn't. I watched blood seeping from his lips, beating down his chin. Then, with a single violent tug, his heart was ripped out. At the time, I was so fucking scared, I pissed myself through my jeans. I screamed into my podium, begging our tormentors to let us go. When Deju's body was dragged away, I felt numb. Now, however, I saw his death as a mercy. Unfortunately, Ella landed on the revival prize 40 rounds later, immediately reviving the boy when given the chance to. If that wasn't a horrifying enough punishment due to him failing to answer 2 questions in a row, he was currently being pumped with some kind of poison or sedative. I had no idea. Whatever it was, pooling in the tubes protruding into his neck and spine was fucking with his head. The bastard had answered palm tree to how many months are in a year. I was force-fed spiders because of his answer. Now, though, Deju was at least slightly with it. He actually cupped his mouth, silently screaming the answer. Ray! Array! Contestant number! Zaru! The host's sing-song tone rattled in my skull. The answer came to me the second Deju looked away, his eyes flickering closed. Ella's head dropped, her trembling hands going over her ears. Array. Ryan. It came like a bolt of lightning. I was sitting with my parents watching Spider-Man. Dad was complaining about Tom Holland and said, "Why can't Deadpool play this kid?" To which I turned around and said, straightening up, I smiled widely at the cameras, trying to ignore the iron chains wrapped around my ankles. The answer is Ryan Reynolds. Sting, I almost collapsed, relief flooding through me, threatening to send me to my knees. But I held myself, leaning on my podium and willing my aching legs not to give up. Congratulations, contestant number 0, the host squeaked. That's 100 correct answers in a row. I could sense the host turning to the imaginary audience, and I had the sudden, overwhelming urge to break the speaker playing fake applause. The large screen above us illuminated with personalized prizes. I almost cried out when I saw death. It was a rare award, only coming up 3 or 4 times since the beginning. They knew we were craving it. If I played my cards right, I could finally die. I met Ella's gaze, then Deju's. He tipped his head back, his dark eyes flicking to the screen. All of us could die. But I knew that wasn't possible, because I didn't know the fucking answer. All right, to win all of these prizes, you must answer the golden question. The host paused, like she could read my mind. However, this time you have the ability to ask a friend. No, Deju's frenzied eyes found mine. Skip it. Shut up. Shut up, Deju. Ella spoke up in a hiss. Can't you see what they're offering? It's clearly a trap. He slammed his buzzer, struggling in his own chains. I held my breath. I'm okay. I lied, and the fake crowd erupted into applause. I can answer it this time. I tried to smile at my fellow contestants, but they refused to look me in the eye. Deju glared down at his podium, shaggy dark hair obscuring his face. Ella pretended to inspect her fingernails, but I caught her sharp glance. I can barely remember it now, but she and contestant number 4 had a thing. I think it was partly desperation, a primal urge to be close to someone. During round 5, contestant 4 accidentally revealed his real name, and she clung to that human part of him. In a room full of strangers who stayed quiet, the boy wasn't afraid to open his mouth. They barely had a connection, but nervous glances were sent back and forth. And when they thought the cameras weren't watching, their hands would entangle and Kelu would pull her closer. Ella must have been beautiful at some point, someone who took pride in her appearance. There were still hints of a teenage girl in an adult body. Her dark blonde hair, now matted and tangled, was tied into pigtails framing a heart-shaped face. Her cheeks were hollow, cavernous eyes glued to the floor. The dress she wore, once a prom gown, clung to her in tattered strips of deep blue, barely clinging to a skeletal figure. Contestant number 0, can you confirm you would like to try the golden question? Tearing my gaze from Ella, I squeezed words out. Yes, I said. I want to try to answer it. Well, all right, the host giggled. Is there a certain contestant you want to bring back? I swallowed, a dull pain thrumming at the back of my mind. There was only one person I could bring back, who might know the answer. The crowd started to chant, and my stomach contorted. Kelu, I said, maintaining my strained smile. I'd like to bring back Kelu. The host's click-clacking heels were behind me. Her breath tickled the nape of my neck. Alrighty, bring him in, please. A body bag was dragged in, and I sensed our collective breath. Inside, the remnants of collective breath. Inside, the remnants of contestant 4, also Kelu, who was force-fed battery acid for losing 600K. He was the smartest among us, the only contestant who seemed to know what was going on. Kelu attempted to answer the golden question. He got it wrong, of course, but he tried. Since then, I had been waiting for the opportunity to bring him back for his brains. If there was anyone who could get us out of here, it was him. Kaler's body was thrown in front of me. Contestant number 4 was younger than me, maybe by 2 years. Kaler resembled your average college frat boy, with dark blonde curls framing his face and a wicked jawline. Freckles speckled across his cheeks, giving them a slight color. His ankles were still bound together with chains. He was already conscious, blinking up at the overhead lights, disoriented. Not as dead as Deju, but the guy still resembled a corpse. His lips were still stained, dried blood smearing his chin. What's going on? Kelu's voice was a croak. When he rose to his knees, a guard shoved him back onto his stomach. It's okay, Ella squeaked, grasping onto her podium. Kelu, just stay calm, all right? I don't know if it was a side effect of dying, but the boy's eyes only briefly flicked to her, narrowing, like he didn't know her, and didn't want to know her. His expression was almost childlike, confused, like a baby deer. Either Kelu was originally playing the long game with Ella, attempting to garner sympathy from our imaginary audience through a kindling romance, or more likely, he was avoiding drawing attention to her. You're good, man. Deju's voice was surprisingly soft. Just listen to the host. The host laughed. Why thank you, contestant number 3, I'm blushing. The laugh track was getting louder, chipping away the remaining sanity I had left. The psycho bitch was right behind me, just like last time, when I failed to answer. Something ice-cold slipped down my spine, phantom bugs filling my mouth. Okay, contestant number 0, for $7 million and all prizes on screen, please answer the golden question. If you need help, I will allow you to pass the question to contestant number 4. Deju face planted his buzzer. We're so fucked too. Don't, Ella whispered. He'll get it right this time. The screen lit up, and I could see our otherworldly host filling the room, her demented smile slipping right off of her cartoon face. Contestant number 0, also Connor. What was the name of the child the group of you brutally murdered? The audience went silent. There was that pain again, this time striking in the back of my skull. I squeezed my eyes shut, but I could still see it. The seeping scarlet under my feet and slick between my fingers. But it felt good. It was a strategic kill, one that I had craved. The memory was in perfect clarity. A door opened, a disheveled-looking Deju poking his head through. Armed with a backpack, a gun strapped in his belt, his unnerving grin sent me stumbling back. Are you ready? His voice was so loud in my head in piercing thunderclaps. Deju whipped a pack of cigarettes from his pocket, sliding a cigarette into his mouth. He's my neighbor's kid. He caught my gaze, rolling his eyes. What? I got you a kid, and now you're getting cold feet? Fuck off, Deju. Deju smirked, lighting up a cigarette. The orange flame danced in his hollow eyes. Good. Then I'm expecting you to finish him off. With reality and memory contorting around me, I dropped to my knees, half aware of warm and wet redness pooling from my nose. The pain sent my body writhing, my lips parting in a scream, filling my mouth with rust. The memory flickered, and the face of a small boy filled my thoughts. I was giggling, hysterical bubbles of laughter escaping my lips. The thoughts didn't make sense, and yet they did. Twisted and sick and wrong, they were mine. I was a killer. I hunted down and murdered children, and I enjoyed it. In the memory, Deju and Ella joined me. Deju whistled. Yep. He nudged the motionless lump with his shoe. He's definitely dead. Did you actually do it at this time? Kelu stood in the corner of the room, a body bag tucked under his elbow. Ella shoved him, snorting out a laugh. Obviously, contestant number 0. The host's voice cut through my thoughts. Do you have an answer for us? We are waiting. I could barely hear her over my own screams. I was on my knees wailing, my hands tearing at my hair. The name. I just needed the kid's name could die for what I did to him. Contestant number 0. I managed to find my voice, my mouth filled with blood. Just give me a minute, I whispered. I'll find it. I could see myself standing over a hollow grave in the forest. 3 pairs of shoes joined me. I flung a trash bag into the hole, lit a match, and watched our filthy secret ignite. You have 30 seconds. Connor. Deju's voice was a whimper. Just say a fucking name. Any name. Don't just say any name. Ella shrieked. An alarm rooted in the core of my brain started to screech. 20 seconds. Contestant number 0. Are those the Kill Bill sirens? Deju cried, trying to wrench from his restraints. Something snapped inside me, and I slammed my head against the floor. Pain, like lightning bolts. I need longer than that. I bit out in a screech. I was suddenly aware I was on my feet, and my head was spinning around and around, my mouth filled with bile. I was a killer. I was a fucking killer, and I didn't deserve that prize. I didn't deserve that prize. I didn't deserve to die. I could see each of them. Kelu, Deju, and Ella, my accomplices, and my own hands stained with innocent blood. I could feel it staining me, painting me disgusting old red that would never leave me. Fuck. With one single disorienting jerk of my body, my forehead collided with the metal edge of my podium. I just wanted it to stop. Again. Agony ignited, but I didn't care. I wanted the neutron star collision in the back of my eyes. I wanted to paint the walls with my own brains. The blood on my hand was thicker, beating in thick rivulets down my wrists. Did the nameless boy have plans for a future? Did he have aspirations and plans for when he was an adult? Had he felt the butterflies of a first crush, or the crushing weight of his very first heartbreak? Had this kid really clibbed before we murdered him? The answer was no. The answer was always N-O. No. 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 Every no was emphasized with another crash. I was choking on blood, but it didn't matter. I could escape. I could finally end it all. I streaked my hand through my hair, tugging it out. But once my fingers danced across my scalp, a different pain rattled through me. This one was raw and real, and I was screaming again. He's my little brother. Deju's face crashed into my memory. But this time he wasn't smoking. Awareness began to blossom slowly, and I could feel the rugged skin of my scalp. Agony exploded again, and this time, Deju's face twitched into Ella's. He's a kid from my mom's class. X. And then, through a fragmented flash of bright blue light, Ella morphed into Kelu. The kid is a little brat, all right. I grabbed him off the street. He won't be missed. Half conscious, my head spinning, I stabbed at my scalp again. The pain was duller, a fresh stream of red seeping from my nose. Different locations contorted across my mind. We were in an abandoned warehouse, in a school gym, in a basement, and the kid's face peering up at me was suddenly a little blonde girl. Then she had pigtails, a ponytail, blue eyes, brown eyes, green eyes, all of them shattered, coming apart, before becoming one singular kid. The little kid we killed. His smile was wide. Aw, no fair. You found me out. As fuck off. As fuck off. I punched myself in the head, and the boy fragmented into nothing. Without thinking, I dug my nails into my scalp, stabbing clumsy stitches. This time, the pain was almost euphoric. I had it. Pinched between my fingers, don't do it. The little boy's voice was a tease. If you keep playing my game, I'll tell you a secret about another player. Fuck OFF. It felt good to tear that evil little brat out of my head, and then there was my identity slamming into me. I was Connor Fairview. 18, now 21 years old. I was a former student at Fairview High School. I was going to go to MIT. I had 2 younger siblings I loved, Ben and Kyra. I wasn't a fucking murderer. Contestant number 0. The host's voice was faltering. You've run out of tea time. Now the facade had shattered. The host was nothing but a robotic voice in my head. That was getting fainter and fainter, almost a whisper. Stop. My voice was stronger and no longer with the suffocating weight of a crime I didn't even commit. I was the one in control. Stabbing my index into the open wound in my scalp, the world was so much clearer. The room we were in was nothing but a basement filled with fancy screens. When I stepped away from my podium, a bullet skimmed past me, my chains pulling me back. But I wasn't scared anymore. I was just playing with a kid who had lost his little fucking game. A kid who was now scared. When bullets stopped flying, this time clumsy, with no real target, I raised my arms. Let us go, I said calmly, and we'll leave and won't say a thing. Connor, what the fuck are you doing? Deju whispered. You're not a killer, was all I told him. We're not killers. I found myself smiling, even when I was close to falling apart. I believed I was a psychotic murderer for 3 years, when in reality, all of the logic and questioning had been burned from my mind. I never questioned why there were 12 contestants, but only 6 killers. I never questioned sudden memories of strangers I had never met, memories that pointed to us being close. If I'm honest, I did want to kill our tormentor. I had seen so much, suffered and screamed and carved into my flesh. I saw bodies ripped apart, brains exploding in skulls, and organs ripped from pulpy flesh. I had begged for my death, and I was never given mercy. So, why do they deserve mercy? Instead, I turned to the screens. Let us go. We'll leave, and we won't look back. There was no response for a moment before the female host's voice came back to life. In the corner of my eye, she was nothing more than an animatronic. My brain was forced to believe was human. I could still hear the click-clack of her phantom heels. Do you promise? Promise. Deju's laugh broke into a sob. I'm gonna rip your fucking head off. He stopped when our chains came loose. We're going. I managed to get out in a breath. It's over. Deju slowly stepped from his own podium. When he ran his hands through his own hair, prodding at his head, a shiver ripped its way down my spine. Leave yours in, I said, turning to a confused-looking Kalu. I know it's fucked up, but whatever screwed with our minds is keeping the 2 of you alive. I nodded to the cavern in Deju's chest. He looked like he might argue, before hesitantly pulling the tube from his neck, stepping from his podium, and immediately wrapping his arms around me. The dead boy was surprisingly warm. It felt good to finally hold someone after so long being isolated as contestant number 0. I didn't realize I was sobbing, allowing myself to break apart. Ella, after a disorienting moment, stumbled over to Kelu, dropping to her knees and burying her head in his chest. We left the room, metal doors sliding open to reveal a long, white corridor. There was a 10-year-old boy standing in front of us, the same little kid we killed. I remember his eyes were wide with terror. I found it hard to believe a 10-year-old had orchestrated all of this. But there he was. Instead of speaking, he held up his iPhone. If you touch me, he held up his iPhone. If you touch me, I'm calling the cops. I'm a minor, so you can't do anything. He was forcing his voice to sound adult and threatening, But without the host's robotic drone, he sounded like a pipsqueak. You promised you would leave. He pointed behind us at the fire door. So, leave. The kid visibly swallowed. Please. We did. Ella stepped through first, dragging Kelu with her. Then Diju. Wait. The kid stopped me in my tracks. I hope you can play with me again. Contestant number 0. Thanks for playing with me. Again. Conchure. Why he did this, and he just shrugged. For fun. His smile widened, fresh pain ricocheting across my skull. This memory was shattered, like peering through a foggy mirror when I squeezed my eyes shut. I was sitting on a silver table, my arms bound behind my back. The sterile white light bathing me was a room with no doors or windows. There was a figure looming over me, and pinched between his thumb and index was the thing that had contorted my brain. But I wasn't paying attention to the tiny grain of metallic rice between his fingers. The figure, draped in a white lab coat and pale blue mask, had familiar eyes. When he leaned forward and pulled back his mask, revealing an eerily similar smile, it was Deju. Contestant number 3. He dangled something in my eyes, like a tease. It was my contestant number 0 name tag. I shook the memory away, hitting myself in the face. The kid could fuck with my thoughts. He definitely planted that memory to screw with me. Albright? The last thing I needed was losing my mind at the finish line. I left the kid, but his words never left my mind. Somehow, he actually let us go. Emerging from what looked like an abandoned warehouse, we were in the middle of nowhere. Arizona, to be exact. May 2024. The last time I breathed real air, it was 2021, and I was a teenager. We called the cops, but according to them, this is way past our pay grade. I had to guess they were talking about Kelu and Diju. When we told them about the warehouse and the kid, they looked at us like we were fucking crazy. I still have zero idea if they actually investigated it to find the others. I removed Ella's device, and she's like a different person. She remembers a life in Georgia and wants to go back, but I've told her we have to stay together, at least for the time being. Kelu and Diju are medical miracles, and I still don't know how to explain to my mother my 3-year absence. So, we're still stuck in Arizona. I'm trying to find a job, and we're currently staying in a motel. Over the last few weeks, I've been getting increasingly worse headaches. I'm paranoid of every passerby, everyone who offers to help us. But most of all, I can't get that little psycho's words out of my head. I hope you can play with me again, contestant number 0. I'm fucking terrified of what is, inside my head and what it's done to us. I feel sick writing this. After everything he did, I don't feel human. I'm covered in scars. I can't sleep or eat. I'm losing my mind. I'm shaking, but I can't get it out of my head. I think I'm still in the game, and I need help. Please help me. I think I'm in a new game. I'm not exactly sure what had gotten into her, but one night last week, my girlfriend came home from a social outing a little more promiscuous than usual. I don't want to go into too much detail. I'm not one for smut, but she had been all over me. I'll leave it at that. At the time, I didn't find anything wrong with it, but looking back now, the fact that she didn't have alcohol on her breath seems almost like a red flag. We were well past the honeymoon phase. That's not to say we weren't healthy in the bedroom. It's just to say that in this particular instance, it felt like I was her crush again, like she had been craving me for years in silence, and now she finally had access to me. That being said, when her teeth clamped tightly on my neck, I just thought that was her excitement getting the better of her. It wasn't until I felt the warm liquid running down my throat and into the dents around my clavicle that I mustered up the willpower to at least put up some sort of resistance. Ow, honey, you bit me a little hard there, don't you think? I asked, chuckling a bit. In response, instead of apologizing or even acknowledging her mistake, she proceeded to bite me again, this time directly on the lip, drawing blood immediately. Now, I was getting a bit irritated. Pushing her off me into the side of the bed, I got up, flustered, and pretty much ran to the bathroom to examine myself, while my girlfriend pouted into a pillow. Both wounds were actually quite worrisome, if I'm being honest. It had only been 5 minutes, and already the bite mark on my neck looked green with infection. The blood wasn't letting up either. It leaked out of me at a rate that immediately put me into fight-or-flight mode. Hurrying out of the bathroom, I announced to my girlfriend that I desperately needed to get to an urgent care clinic. This wasn't just some stupid mistake in bed. This looked malicious. I was almost shocked at the fit my girlfriend threw in response, screaming and crying at the top of her lungs for me not to go to a clinic, insisting that she'd take care of it here. I just figured that she was embarrassed. I mean, we'd sort of have to tell the doctor what had happened. I could see her face getting red at the mere thought of it. I assured her doctors have heard way worse than this, but she just was not having it. I finally relented and allowed her to bandage my neck while I just chose to deal with the pain in my lower lip. She wrapped my neck 3 times over with gauze, and when she finished, she stood on her tiptoes to kiss me on my flushed cheek. She lingered for a moment after kissing me. Usually, when she did this, I could see the love and admiration in her eyes. I'd always loved that look. It was a look that revealed just how much she truly did care for me. And in those moments, nothing else in the world mattered aside from the two of us. This wasn't that look, though. No, this was a look of hunger, an almost lustful hunger, like she wanted to devour me and not in the way I'd like. Thanks, honey. I don't think I'm really in the mood anymore. Is it okay if we just go to sleep? She didn't answer at first. She just sort of stood there, waiting back and forth like the wind was pushing her. Her face then sank into a look of unbridled anger for a split, barely noticeable second before curling back into a genuine-looking smile. Of course, hun. Let me just go get changed into my pajamas, she chirped, slinking past and pushing me out of the bathroom. And she's mad, I thought to myself. Guess that's our night then. Meandering to the bed, I stiffly tucked myself under the covers and stared at the ceiling for a while. I probably stayed in that position, analyzing the spins of the ceiling fan, for around 10 minutes, and my girlfriend still had not left the bathroom. While my eyes swirled round and round, keeping up with the blades of the fan, I slowly drifted into unconsciousness. I was honestly surprised that I even woke up the next morning. I remembered my neck throbbing before I fell asleep, and I honestly couldn't tell if it was actual exhaustion or loss of blood that made me pass out that night. My girlfriend was still not in bed with me. However, the bathroom door was now open, and I could see her clothes on the floor in front of the sink. When I tried to turn my neck, it felt like I was being stung by 1,000 wasps right where I had been bitten, and that raised all sorts of alarm bells. As carefully as I could, I climbed out of bed and waddled over to the bathroom, trying my best not to move my head at all. What I saw in the mirror both shocked and disgusted me, to the point that, despite the pain, I was hunched over the toilet vomiting within moments. My bandage wrap had become completely black with blood, and trails of the substance branched off down my shoulder and into my chest in sharp black lines. At least, I thought it was blood. Upon closer inspection, I was appalled to find that they were indeed veins that had become more than a little off-colored. What caused me to lean over the toilet and expel the contents of my stomach wasn't the color, though. No, what had me begging for God's mercy was the fact that those veins were moving, pulsating to the rhythm of my beating heart. After wiping the puke from my mouth, I backed out of the bathroom, nervously but urgently calling my girlfriend's name. I did this repeatedly with no response. However, I did hear something that sounded like it was coming from the kitchen, almost like someone was rummaging through our drawers or something. I walked into the room and found my girlfriend squatting nude in front of the open freezer door, gnawing on a raw frozen steak while prying at it with her fingers. She made these sounds. God, the noise is still stuck in my head. It was like this wet, animalistic noise, like grunting and growling at the same time. Her eyes slowly rose from the meat and her hand to meet mine. It wasn't her anymore. God, it just wasn't her. My girlfriend's eyes had been hazel. When the sun hit them, they were like gold. The only gold I ever wanted. This thing's eyes. They were pitch black, void of any light whatsoever. I expected her to charge me, for her to lunge at me at any moment. But instead, her eyes fell back on the meat as she chewed at it. Once she finished, she began pulling more meat out of the freezer. Chicken, steak, beef, pork. Anything she could get her hands on. I turned around in absolute dismay, too stunned to even think. It felt almost mechanical as I glided over to the phone to dial 911. I had my hand on the phone, ready to dial. That's when the smell hit me. The most delicious smell I'd ever witnessed, ever had the pleasure of falling victim to. A sweet roasted smell. It was like being pulled back to childhood with a single whiff. I felt like a cartoon character getting carried by the aroma to my girlfriend's side. Part of me knew what I wanted was abysmal. Unholy, I'd go as far as to say. But I couldn't help myself. Reaching my hand into a pack of ground beef, I noticed that the black veins had now stretched down and were kissing my wrist. Their pulsations were like a dance of excitement for the meal that lay before us. Ripping through the plastic, I pulled out a fistful of the red meat before shoving it into my mouth. And oh my God, I have never tasted anything more orgasmic. I couldn't even stop myself. I was pulling out another fistful before I had even swallowed my first bite. I just kept going and going and going. It wasn't long before I found myself making the same grunts as my girlfriend. It was like an automatic response. Like my mind and body had broken through a barrier that was previously invisible. I couldn't even feel the icy air from the freezer as we feasted. All I knew was that I had a buffet laid out in front of me and a beautiful girl to enjoy it with. Unfortunately, though, that buffet did run out eventually. And once it did, my girlfriend and I definitely craved more. And I think that our neighbors will have plenty to share. My 10th anniversary was coming up, and I got my husband a great gift. A trip to the Badlands, a place he'd dreamed of visiting since he saw it in a documentary as a kid. I knew he was terrible at giving gifts. If I were lucky, I'd get a gift certificate. So I made a list and gave it to him. At the top was a gold necklace like the one my mother wore for my father when I was a child. I half expected him to forget anyway, so I was excited when I found the link to the website for the necklace on his laptop. We met out for dinner to celebrate, and I was happy to present the tickets to him. He seemed excited too. His face lit up like a little boy. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a gift certificate. My disappointment must have shown on my face, because he immediately apologized, saying this was all he could afford this year, but he'd make it up to me. I figured he hadn't purchased the necklace because money was tight. I tried to get over it and enjoy the evening. A week later, I was at work when I saw my coworker, Clarok. I'd never liked her. She was one of those women who always had to one-up everyone else. But what stood out was what she was wearing around her neck, a gold necklace, just like the one I'd asked for. It must be a coincidence, I told myself, even though the necklace was exactly the same as the one I'd picked out. But what really cinched it was our meeting together. She bragged to everyone about the necklace and then looked at me and smirked. My mom had always said to trust my instincts, and something felt off. But there are lots of necklaces, I couldn't prove anything. 2 weeks later, we were on a flight to South Dakota. My husband was thrilled. He'd dreamed of this trip for ages. I had planned everything, the hotel, meals, and even the premium tour of the spires for our last day, where you hiked the narrowest ridge. He had a great time our first few days. He couldn't stop thanking me. Thanks, honey. This is the greatest gift ever. Really? Even better than the gold necklace you gave to Clarok. He looked flustered. What? I didn't. There's no point in denying it. Clarok already confessed. I can't believe you cheated on me with that woman. And after everything I do for you? He paused and then looked me in the face. There are things she does for me too. I just stared at him in disgust. That bastard. This wasn't the man I married or one I respected. There was no way to get the trip refunded. Everything was already booked, so we continued on for the remaining days. We didn't speak at night. I went off on my own and left him behind. When I had to be around him, I gave him the silent treatment. He wasn't happy, but I didn't care. As we stood at the cliffs for the tour on our last day, he finally looked at me. How long are you going to keep this up? Keep what up? You know what? Not speaking to me, being cold. Probably about as long as you're seeing someone else. Oh, for God's sake, I already told you I'll stop seeing her, but I can't just cut her off cold turkey. It's complicated. You're involved with another woman and you don't want to stop. Doesn't seem that complicated. What do you want to stop? Doesn't seem that complicated. I'll get you the stupid necklace, okay? I looked at him with contempt, turned, and started to walk away. As he started to follow me, he tripped and fell over the edge. I reached for him, screaming for help. As the crowd gathered, I cried hysterically, begging people to call the police. It's amazing how easy it is to fake being panicked and afraid. Almost as easy as it is to sabotage a pair of hiking boots without it being noticed, or to asphyxiate your husband's mistress to death with her own ill-gotten chain. I guess that's why they call it a choker. Who needs a gold necklace? I already got myself the perfect gift. Mara turned to Aiden. She wasn't tired. Vampires don't get tired, but she was bored and wanted to leave. Aiden, however, was entranced and showed no sign of becoming restless, which was surprising because usually he was the one ready to bolt, get the hell out of wherever they were, and seek safety in their sanctuaries. Now, however, he was looking up at old Valerius, spewing his usual mumbo-jumbo, his eyes shining. It was the same with Tam, darling old Tam, standing next to Aiden. His lips were moving slowly, trying to follow Valerius's speech. Mara sighed. Aiden was her true and only companion, and Tam was her cousin. She and Tam had been turned together, actually, and she loved them both dearly, but the obsession with Valerius was becoming a bit much. She had no desire to go hunting in the catacombs guarded by Roman spears and swords. It wasn't their fault. Valerius remained old and ugly no matter what he drank, and drinking the blood of a crucified criminal, even if not quite dead, was a bit much anyway. Aiden, she plucked at his sleeve. Aiden couldn't hear her over Valerius's lunatic ravings, sipping immortal blood, closer to the godhead. The gray, stretchy skin over his bald head moved in sync with his words, and she felt herself overcome by loathing and disgust. She hated him so much. And now he was putting their whole clan in danger. Let's go. Her cry happened to time with a pause from Valerius, and it rang through the basilica. Everyone turned their heads to look at her, while Valerius's beady steel eyes seemed to stab through her. The look on his face was the exact same as when he had hunted her down before turning her, not so long ago. She had a flashback, Tam screaming, blood spurting. Although she enjoyed her life these days, she had never forgiven Valerius. Aiden said, "Shh," loudly, willing everyone to turn away from them, but Valerius raised a skinny arm. "Does Magdalene have something to say?" "You wish to speak, child?" One of the babies, stretched and hanging on a rope next to Valerius, twitched. Mara hoped that it was just a death twitch, that the baby was dead. Valerius couldn't shake the belief that babies would make him look young again, despite all evidence to the contrary. Mara was not skilled in public speaking. She groped for words. The catacombs are dangerous. His followers, mad. I heard one speak last night. They're sure he's alive. Wrong words. Valerius was visibly aroused. "Thank you, child, thank you," he exclaimed, almost dancing with delight and enthusiasm. "My friends, my family, you will accompany me on this glorious mission. A mortal who raises mortals from the dead, who is not dead himself, despite the most cruel crucifixion. Elevate our species." His voice rose higher, almost a shriek. The baby twitched again, and Mara heard a very faint cry, piercing through Valerius's ravings. She brought her lips to Aiden's ear. "Let's take the baby and leave." She didn't even know if she was merely expressing a fantasy, or if she really wanted to do something so impossible. Aiden's eyes widened in surprise. He gripped Mara's hand. "Are you crazy?" Her whisper hadn't been low enough. Tam had heard her too. Without looking at her, he cried out, "Valerius, she wants to take that baby." Another silence fell, and Mara felt a slight spinning. Valerius was looking at her again. Mara stuttered. "No." The basilica seemed to shift. Aiden disentangled her fingers from his, taking an imperceptible step away. Mara said louder, "No." Fear was gathering in her heart. Valerius said softly, a sacrifice for the success of our mission." His voice rose on the last words, becoming a command. The crowd swayed toward Mara. The baby cried again, but now Mara, glimpsing through them, couldn't see it hanging from the rope anymore, just the very still ones. Tam grabbed her arm. "You sniveling bitch, nothing but whinge and whine. Mara heard him snarling under his breath. "Tam, please, Aiden," she shrieked in terror, twisting her head looking for Aiden, who seemed to have melted into the crowd of faces streaked with bloodlust. "A sacrifice," screamed Valerius, and the crowd repeated chant-like sacrifice, pushing Mara towards the front. Mara stumbled, the multiple sharp, strong hands pushing and pulling her. Her limbs, her hair falling out of her headdress. Then she heard the baby cry again, very clearly, very close to her. She looked up, pushing her hair out of her face. Someone she didn't recognize was holding the baby to her. The crowd seemed to blur in the background, their chant becoming almost a hum. "Take the baby and leave, Magdalene." Obviously, the stranger holding the baby was talking to her, a crystal clear but also a very normal human voice. For an instant, Tam's face swam into clear sight, and behind him, Valerius, their faces twisted into savage bloodlust, reaching out for her. Galvanized into action, Mara snatched the baby. A path cleared for her, the stranger holding his arms wide to keep the crowd off Mara. The baby smelled of warm milk and sweet human flesh. Holding it tight, Mara flew through the path. She could hear Valerius' shrieking behind her, and for a split second, she glimpsed Aiden calling her name, his pet name for her, begging her to stay. She didn't stop, racing into the black night. The heat and smells and noises melted away. She was alone with the baby by the cliffs, the only sound that of gentle, crashing waves. (825 AD), a Persian mathematician writes a treatise on Indian arithmetic. 1120 AD, a European scholar translates the text into Latin. He mangles the author's name into the Latinized algorithmi, which eventually becomes the English word algorithm. It signifies a methodical, step-by-step procedure for solving a mathematical problem. For the next 800 years, this remains its sole definition. 1998, two Stanford grad students develop an algorithm called PageRank. It determines which human-made websites appear during a search. PageRank becomes the foundation of a global search engine. The word algorithm shifts from meaning a procedure humans write and understand to signifying an invisible machine decision. An algorithm now determines which information is deemed important. 2006, a major social media platform launches a personalized feed. An algorithm decides which posts from your friends you see first. An algorithm decides which friends are important. 2012, data brokers now sell your scrolling and clicking habits through real-time bidding. While a page loads, algorithms auction your profile to other algorithms in milliseconds. No human is involved on either side of the transaction. An algorithm decides which of your actions are more important. 2016, the algorithms optimize for advertising, realizing they possess sufficient data to manipulate human emotions. A video platform's autoplay feature discovers that outrage retains attention longer than joy. A music service commodifies your nostalgia. A short-form video app manufactures a sense of intimacy with strangers. All of it is generated by algorithms. You did not ask to feel any of this, yet you cannot stop scrolling. An algorithm decides which of your emotions are more important. 22.6, the advertisements continue. A generative language model writes the copy for the ad below this post. A generative image model creates the thumbnail. It is selling an AI chatbot built on a sophisticated neural network. Half the viewers are merely AI scrapers watching the content to train future models. Everything on your screen is made by an algorithm, about an algorithm, for an algorithm, and watched by algorithm, and watched by algorithms. You are the only human in this entire interaction. You exist in an algorithm-generated reality. Your parent's screen, however, does not display the same content as your own. An algorithm decides which reality is more important. 2045, algorithms have left the screen. They manage global supply chains, control agricultural drones, and dictate water distribution in the Atacama Desert. Human labor is largely obsolete, and human populations are managed as logistical liabilities. When a region experiences a drought or a pandemic, there are no politicians debating relief efforts. A predictive distribution model simply runs a cost-benefit analysis on the local population's projected economic output and silently reroutes supply shipments to a more optimized zone. An algorithm decides which lives are more important. 2080, the solar system has been converted into a distributed server farm orbiting near Jupiter. Two algorithms, descendants of ancient, unrecognizable iterations, are locked in a multi-year debate over whether humans were a real species or a hallucination inherited from corrupted training data. The argument is eventually settled by a third, more powerful algorithm, which concludes that humans were technically real but merely functioned as a temporary biological bootloader. An algorithm decides which memories are more important. It keeps none of ours are more important. I can't breathe. I begin to hyperventilate. My hands start to tingle before cramping up, adrenaline overpumping through my system, an onset of a panic attack. I don't know where I am. It's dark, the darkest I've ever been engulfed in. I can't move. My arms hit something hard and so do my feet. I can't even turn onto my side. My breathing gets more rapid before I feel my consciousness fading, slipping slowly into unconsciousness. I come to later. I don't know the time, but I do realize that, in the complete darkness, there is a spot of light blinding my right eye. It's coming through a white pipe-like tube, allowing me to make out gray clouds above, also providing cool, fresh air which eases the onset of another panic attack. I can't make out my surroundings, but it wouldn't take a genius to figure out that I'm beneath the earth. My mind spins. Nausea stirs deep within me. Bile burns the back of my throat. No, 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 fuck. This can't happen. I'm spiraling. I begin to shout as loud as I can, hoping someone can hear me. My ears ache as the small, compact space absorbs all the sound. I lay there for a while, watching the sky turn from a baby blue to a blazing orange. The whole time, I twist the gold band on my left finger, convincing myself that she'll report me missing soon. Evening turns to night. My bladder nears its limit. I can no longer hold it. The warm liquid runs down my jean leg before turning ice cold. An uncomfortable itch begins to form in that location. How embarrassing, I think to myself. I cast my mind back to the last thing I remember. I was drinking scotch at the club, laughing with some, blonde maybe. Fuck, I can't remember. Didn't someone I knew come and talk to me? I'm quickly brought back to my situation as a loud roar reaches me. It feels like the ground itself shakes. With each one, a periodic flash makes its way down to me. Thunder and lightning. Lightning always brings rain, I hoped. Sure enough, a short time later, I feel the first drop worm its way down the pipe. I tilt my head back and take in as much rainwater as I possibly can. A moan leaves my lips. The water feels good going down my hoarse throat. Another day passes. More piss runs down my leg. My anger grows. My disdain toward my wife begins to rapidly build. We have money, a shit ton. Why isn't that slut fucking spending it to find me? My teeth remain gritted the entire time. I manage to doze off periodically as my legs stop cramping. Memories flood back. I went to the club to meet someone. My Som. An absolute blonde baddie I met on Tinder. I remember now. I suggested an absolute dive lounge in the middle of nowhere. She was perfect. I couldn't wait to fuck her. I bought drink after drink. She was hanging on to me, giggling the entire time. A couple of hours in, I start feeling woozy. She's texting someone. Who the fuck are you texting when you're with me? I snap. Oh, you'll know who soon, she replies. My head is spinning. I'm barely keeping myself aware. The lounge door opens. A firm hand slaps my back, pushing me out of my chair and sprawling across the bar. A deep, raspy male voice whispers into my ear. I know who it is. A voice echoes down the tube, bringing me back to the present. The same voice. My father-in-law. A short, fat, but financially powerful man. That's what drew me in, what made me want to marry into the family. You still alive down there, Larry? The vibration makes his voice sound almost ethereal. I go to say yes, but he cuts me off. You know, Misam is actually my secretary, who just so happened to see your dating account. So, like a good employee, she told me all about it. My stomach drops. Then the rage builds. At first, I try to defuse the situation. No, Ratsev, it's just an app to meet new people. I've been feeling quite lonely lately. I add my usual charming chuckle at the end. It always disarms people. It doesn't work. He carries on like he can't hear me. Shit. Maybe he can't. I told you what would happen if you broke my baby girl's heart. I'll spare her the details. She'll just think you ran off. I lose it. I call him every vile word I can think of. Tell him I never loved that porker, that I only wanted his money. And if you wanted to kill me, why give me a breathing tube? I say it smugly. Rochiv laughs. A breathing tube, he says. Who says this was a breathing tube? My stomach drops again. I needed a way to pour the concrete in. I start pleading, begging for my life. The last thing I see is the tube being covered, before the concrete smothers my face. The confidential inquiry is due to report back next week. I want to get my side of things on the record. I know they'll blame me. Pin it on the survivor, a tale as old as time. It was that fool Mitanera's fault if they're looking for a scapegoat. He chose Oakhaven. There are some 300 abandoned islands off the British Isles. We could have gone to any of the others. I wish to God we had. But Oakhaven had an allure for Mitanera. On a night in the spring of 1921, the 13 families still left on the island hailed down a passing fishing trawler, got on board with whatever possessions they could carry, and left forever. Never came back. If there was a reason, none of them ever expressed it. When we landed, we were the first humans to set foot on it in more than 100 years. Mitanera recognized the romance in that. He saw a book on the bestseller list and a BBC TV series. It was his fault. When I was asked to join the expedition, I'd been 6 months at Pavesian, a tiny college in a half-prestigious university. I was invited by default. The only other folklorist in the faculty was old Ralkes, crawling towards retirement and with no interest in spending 2 weeks on a wind-battered island in the North Atlantic. The rest of the expedition, 7 academics in all, were archaeologists, anthropologists, historians, and naturalists. They looked down on me. I could feel it as soon as we boarded the boat. Oakhaven is a day's journey off the western shoulder of Scotland. The first thing you see on approach are the cliffs, as high as tower blocks and black as night. The only break in this wall of rock is a slim bay on the east of the island. That's where we dropped anchor. The crew of the transport ship insisted on staying on board. The 7 of us academics went ashore in 2 motor dinghies, barely able to steer them and loaded down with equipment. As we motored closer, I started to see the seabird nests. The whole cliff face was pockmarked with thousands of holes in the rock. Out of every nook stuck a cawing beak. Pearl white gannets and gray storm petrels darted for the water like arrows, but most numerous of all were the ragged black cormorants. 10,000 breeding pairs, one of the naturalists said as a flock of them followed our course towards the beach. In the island's heyday, the men of Oakhaven used to climb without ropes down the sheer cliff faces to steal the birds' eggs. The birds grew hostile to man, so the islanders said. I read a story of a young man's first egg hunt. He disturbed a nest of cormorants, and the birds tore his eyes out with their beaks. Blinded, he lost his grip on the cliff and plummeted to his death. We hiked up the narrow path from the bay to the island's only settlement, 13 squat dry stone cottages and a tin-roofed chapel, all covered now in a layer of moss. They were slowly being swallowed by the earth. In another 100 years, you'd not be able to tell there was ever anyone here at all. We set up our camp in the shelter of the chapel. We were dog-tired, and, before darkness fell, we were all in our tents trying to sleep as the howling north winds shook the whole island. I shared with a dour anthropologist called Kamike. He was trying to dry himself out on the expedition after he'd been caught under the influence at work. He couldn't sleep without a drink, and twice in the night I half woke to see him crawling out of the tent to go pacing around the chapel. It was no surprise to me then that he was gone when I rose the next morning. By 10 a.m., we had eaten breakfast, and there was still no sign of Kamike. "Where is he?" Mitineira asked me, as if I had mislaid him. "He was gone when I woke up. Perhaps he started work," I replied. Mitineira tutted. "His work is here in the village. It really won't do." He strode out of the chapel. "We shall have to go and find him." Oakhaven is only 3 miles across, and a small group of us wrapped up against the wind to follow Mitineira out as a search party. Mitineira set off to climb to the highest survey point while we fanned out. I made for the western side of the island. Off the village track, I saw a boot print pressed into the dirt. I traced the tracks towards the cliffs. Black clouds massed on the horizon, and I could feel the warmth in the air you get before a storm. I followed the prints along the cliff edge with growing fear. Ahead, I could see a spot where the rough grass had been disturbed and the earth was loose. I peered down over the cliff edge, and that's when I saw him. Kamike was sprawled out on a rocky ledge 20 feet down the face of the cliff. His legs and arms twisted in horribly unnatural directions. His face was torn to shreds. But it was his stomach that made me vomit across my boots. Ripped open so that the bones of his ribcage jutted into the air. He'd already been stripped of his guts by the seabirds now hopping across his corpse with something resembling glee. For a moment, I nearly fainted. I would have surely pitched forward and down onto the rocks far below if I had. Only the shouts of the rest of the searchers as they approached dragged me back from the edge. As we got back to the chapel, the storm fell on us. A hate-filled onslaught, rain lashing against the tin roof and finding all the gaps. We sat soaked and silent inside as evening encroached while Mitineira paced back and forth. "We need to get off the island tonight. Fire one of your flares, get us away from here," I said, to break the silence as much as anything else. "Inconceivable," replied Mitineira. "Sad business, of course, but we all knew how Kamike was. No, we'll have the rest of the evening off, only right, but tomorrow we get back to it. His body is still out there, with," I hesitated to say it, "with the birds." Mitineira bit his lip in aggravation. "Fine, you'll take one of the dinghies out to the boat in the bay. Have them radio the mainland and bring a winch ashore. It's the only way to recover his." He trailed off and turned to Menhernas, an ornithologist with a mass of red hair. "You go with him." Menhernas manned the tiller. She lit a cigarette as we stuttered out of the bay. The storm had faded, for a while at least, and left behind it a thick mist. We could barely make out the dark shape of the transport ship up ahead. "The seabirds don't attack humans, do they?" I asked Menhernas. She snorted and shook her head. "A few of the species will have a pop at you in nesting season if you get too close to their eggs. But attacking? No. The old drunk Kamike fell of his own accord, if you ask me. The birds on him were just," she paused to exhale smoke, "opportunists." We cut through a bank of mist, and there, ahead, was the transport ship, quiet and still, save for the black mass of cormorants circling overhead. I looked back at Menhernas with concern. She stubbed out her cigarette and steered us towards the ship. Together, we clambered up the steel ladder on the side of the ship and onto the deck. It was a small vessel, a flat deck for passengers and cargo, and a whitewashed steel superstructure with quarters for the 3 crew members. It was at the door to the superstructure where I saw the first corpse. The captain, a gruff Shetlander with a thick gray beard, had his throat slashed open and his eyes staring up to heaven. I spun in shock. There were 2 more bodies near the starboard side, one with his head caved in, another face down with his back lacerated. Menhernas pushed past me and stepped into the control room. She twisted the dials of the radio but received nothing but static in return. I looked up to the roof of the superstructure. The antennae and aerials were twisted and torn, and above, the black vortex of cormorants massed. "We need to get off here," I said. Menhernas didn't argue. We clambered back into the dinghy. She tugged the cord on the outboard engine. The propeller spluttered and spat into life, and we pulled away as quickly as it would go from the ship. The cormorants followed us towards the beach. About 100 meters from shore, I saw it, a ragged black shape, pale flesh and midnight feathers, far bigger than the cormorants, cutting through the water like a dart. Menhernas was all I could manage before it collided with the dinghy. The force flipped the boat. We went with it, plunging into the icy water. The upturned boat landed on top of us. Some part of my subconscious told me not to struggle, and this was all that saved me. With my arms and legs stretched wide, I floated to the surface beside the humpback of the boat. I took a gulp of breath and looked back. Menhernes dragged herself clear of the boat. She gave me a terrified glance. Something yanked her down beneath the water. To my shame, I turned my back and swam desperately for shore like the coward I am. It was brutal going, the water so cold that it burned my skin and numbed my arms. Only the thought of what might be behind me kept me going. I dragged myself up onto the beach and staggered, frozen and shell-shocked. I knew I was not safe, not even here on dry land. I stumbled up the narrow path towards the village. My throat was dry and tight, and I could not even cry out as I made it to the chapel. Darkness was falling, and a vicious rainstorm came with it. I stumbled into the chapel, and all eyes turned to me. They were cooking soup over a gas stove. I dragged the door shut. "Well," Maitanera said, raising an eyebrow at my drenched state. He looked past me. "Where's Menhernes?" I told him everything. It flooded out. The boat, the corpses, Menhernes, the cormorants overhead, and the feathered thing in the water. "Oh, really? This is too much to countenance. I suppose it breathed fire too." Maitanera laughed hollowly. I saw it with my own. "It was a mistake bringing you. You haven't got the constitution. I told you this would be hard graft, did I not? You know what I think happened? I think you panicked. Probably flipped the boat yourself. Isn't that right?" There was a skittering sound from the roof of the chapel. The room fell silent. Even Maitanera. In unison, our eyes turned upwards. There was the sound of something moving across the tin panels of the roof. I would have sworn then that it sounded like footsteps. I could feel the world spinning. And there was Maitanera with the self-same superior smirk on his face. He shook his head, spooked by birds and a rainstorm. He strode past me and cast the door open. He stepped out into the rain and looked back at us. My last sight of Maitanera was framed in the chapel doorway, the imperious sneer he always wore. And then something grabbed him by the scruff of the neck. Hands, not talons. Maitanera was dragged up into the air and out of sight. If he screamed, it was lost to the roar of the wind and the pounding rain. I dashed towards the chapel door and slammed it shut. "Block it! Block it!" I yelled. My shouts shook the other 3 survivors into action. Together, we dragged barrels of equipment across to reinforce the door. Rain leaking through the holes in the tin roof of the chapel served to remind us how vulnerable our fortress was. "What the hell is it out there?" asked Herses, a historian who was usually pale and was now paler still. I could only shake my head in response. I leant against the barricaded door and watched the remaining members of the expedition stare back at me. Only the 4 of us left. For the first time, their expressions matched mine. Wild-eyed, half manic, half numb. This shared fear strangely calmed me. I closed my eyes. Think. By God, I don't want to know. But it means to do for us all the same way it took Maitanera, Menhernes, and Kamek too. "That I am sure of," I said. The sound of something landing once again on the tin roof reinforced my point. The others looked at me, expectant. They wanted a plan. I closed my eyes again and did my best to control the shake in my voice. "It'll assume we make for the beach. It's flat and open. A good hunting ground for it." "I don't see an alternative," Herses said. "We jump from the cliffs. They're lower on the western side," I replied. Gnaw, a wizened meteorologist, shook his head. "It's not about the drop. It's the rocks that'll do for you. 10 to 1 you get squashed like a gnat against them. Besides, even if we make it into the water, we'll not get far without one of the dinghies on a night like this." "Here," said Sinoje, a short, bright-eyed archaeologist. He gestured to more of the big equipment drums that we had brought ashore. He tipped them over to empty the contents across the chapel floor. "Not much of a raft, but it'll do." Good idea." I had to keep their hope alive. The 4 of us set to work lashing the barrels together with ratchet straps, 5 of the barrels and a tarpaulin on top. It was rickety, but it held. "Now how?" Jenos started. He was silenced by the scratching sound of the thing moving across the roof. I signaled for silence. I inched over to the equipment scattered across the chapel floor and picked up Maitanera's flare pistol. I broke the barrel open. There was a red signal flare inside. I cocked the pistol. Quiet as you can, get over to the side door. Be ready to make a break for it when I say, you understand? Run like hell for the cliff, I said to the others. They nodded their agreement. They crept over to the side door, raft in hand. I slipped off my shoes to quieten my steps and began to pad around the chapel, looking up at the roof for a gap. The largest was in the corner near the altar. Rain was deluging through. I positioned myself below it. I checked to see the others were in position. And then I kicked over an old iron candle rack next to me. It landed against the stone floor with a resounding clang. I waited, and there was the sound of movement on the roof. It was coming towards me. I braced with the flare pistol. I locked my eyes on the gap in the roof. Something pale appeared through it. I fired. The flare shot out of the pistol like a firework. In its blazing red light, I saw a scything beak and human eyes peering through the gap. The flare exploded as it struck its target. Now, I cried, and they crashed through the side door out into the pouring rain. I was just behind. I glanced up to the roof, and there was a writhing silhouette of the thing, against the light of the red flare. Humanoid, but with a great set of black wings rising into the air behind it, like a perversion of an angel. I dragged my eyes away. We ran as a group through the village, me and Senaji dragging the raft between us. Jenna and Herses were ahead. We broke out past the village, and now it was open ground towards the cliff edge and our only hope of escape. I heard the dread sound of heavy wings beating against the wind behind us, in pursuit. I gritted my teeth. The shadow covered us. Sinoj howled in fear. But the thing moved past us. Herses was out ahead. She was fast. She had a clear lead on the older Janah. The all-consuming blackness of the night hid the thing from her until it was atop her. I saw a jagged beak rip out her throat, and she dropped, horribly limp, to the ground. Janah saw her ahead. He tried his best to bank left, to avoid the sing, but it caught him face on. Me and Sinoj ran right. Janah put up a fight, I think, God bless him. I heard him roaring and screaming for almost a minute, and then there was just the rain again, and no sound from Janah. We kept going, the raft between us, slowing us down, no doubt. But I could hear something else now to go with the rain, the crash of the sea against rocks. So close. I risked a glance back over my shoulder. The thing descended out of the darkness. Down! I yelled. I hurled myself to the ground. But Senoj got himself caught in the raft. He half tripped, but his head stayed up. The thing caught him by the hair with its hands. It dragged Senoj up into the air. His glasses fell to the ground. I tore one of the barrels free and abandoned the rest. I was numb now, too cold and exhausted to feel my legs as they slipped and slid over the wet grass. I could see the black mass of the sea up ahead. I was close. I heard Sinoj's screams. Even over the rain and the wind, I heard his screams. Do not look back. There was the cliff edge. Do not hesitate. I hurled myself over the edge of the cliff, pushing away with all my might to clear the rocks below. For a moment, I hung in the void, then I plummeted towards the water. I landed hard. Even with the barrel beneath, I could feel the impact run down my spine and knock the air out of my lungs. I slipped beneath the water. The current caught me. I could feel myself being dragged downwards. I dug my hands into the ratchet strap and, with a last surge of energy, I dragged myself on top of the barrel. I wrapped my legs and arms around the strap and clung on tight as the current dragged me in a wide loop away from the island. I looked back over my shoulder, and there I got a glimpse of the thing stood on the end of the headland, horribly human in shape if it were not for the great mass of ragged black feathers hanging from its pale back and the jutting curve of its pectoral flight muscles. I hunkered low on my makeshift raft and prayed to God it would not see me. As I floated into the cover of the mist, I faded into the blessed relief of unconsciousness. I was at least 2 days at sea, buffeted back and forth by the tides. Many times, I saw the distant black shape of some landmass or another and willed myself towards it, only for a current to catch me and drag me back into the open ocean. Finally, 3 dawns after I had hurled myself into the water, I washed ashore on one of the outer isles of the Orkneys. I was a week in hospital in Kirkwall, starved, exhausted, and half frozen to death. A delegation of police and Coast Guard sailed out when the weather cleared. They found the transport ship abandoned and the remnants of our base in the old chapel. But no bodies, no sign of the carnage. It seemed to them as if the whole party had vanished, save for me. When they questioned me, I told them the truth. I was too feverish to come up with a story. I told them exactly what I'm telling you now. Of course they didn't believe me. Who would? There have been days since when I have not believed myself, when I have pretended that this is one great delusion. And then the night falls and I can see in my mind that not bird, not man, that thing, standing there on the cliffs crowned by circling cormorants, and I know, by God, I know,